It's Windows Presentation Foundation. WPF is still Microsoft's go-to desktop UI technology. It's awesome, it's easy, it's fast, and on this episode we're going to talk about how just a simple idea can become real very quickly thanks to technologies that are just baked and awesome, like WPF. So hang on, that's this episode of Dev Radio. Hi, and welcome to the next episode of Microsoft Dev Radio. I'm Jerry, and I'm here with Jeremy and Martin, and I'm going to introduce them to you one at a time so we can talk about just an easy way to make you more productive with technologies that you've already got at your fingertip. I'm going to start with Martin Schray, my favorite developer evangelist. Hiya, Martin.
Hi, how you doing, Jerry?
Where do you live, Martin?
I am based in Chicago, and I live in a suburb of Chicago.
You live in a suburb. It looks like you live in the basement of Chicago based on your background and all the eye charts that you have.
That's important because sometimes I need to read them, you know? Practice makes the eyes strong.
Do you have a mirror? Do you have a mirror on your monitor? You know, they say you're nicer when you have a mirror on your monitor.
I've heard that, and
it's all over my monitor. It's not helpful.
I read that somewhere too, and I've got to get a mirror so I'll be even nicer.
Yeah, I can't even imagine. If you put a mirror, I can't imagine the danger of too much niceness like that, Martin.
Too much nice.
You're a developer evangelist, but you're a special evangelist. Kind of tell me who you are.
Sure. So before I joined Microsoft, I actually worked at 3 startups. And when I joined Microsoft, I tried to work with startups. And whether it's kind of trying to be a startup on our own team, but it turns out I'm actually on a team that works directly with startups. So I'm based in Chicago. I work with 1871, Matter, Techstar Chicago, and they're fantastic startups. And my job really is to help startups find, use, and be successful on the Microsoft platforms.
Nice. Very nice. And one example of that startup would be the Illinois Institute of Technology. That's just a couple of weeks old, a couple of co-founders.
Well, not quite, but students
we're going to be talking about Illinois Tech. How in the world does that fit in with a startup evangelist?
Absolutely. So I've been wired into Illinois Tech for 5, 6, 7 years now.
Okay.
I work with students. Like if you think about students, there are startups in the student space, and if you think about some of the things that go on in the idea shop that Jeremy will talk a little bit about, you'll find student startups or students that are working toward a startup in that space, and that's kind of been my involvement.
Okay, I gotcha. Very good. I love talking about startups, and I love the energy around it. It's terrific. Okay, so we've got Jeremy Alexis. He's also in Chicago, right there at the Institute of Technology at Illinois Tech. Jeremy, you are the academic director of the Idea Shop, which has to sound like one of the coolest things. I guess it's just a shop where you make ideas?
It is, yes. I can't believe that they pay me to do my job. It's great because every day I get up and go to this great prototyping lab that does digital and physical prototyping and helps students take their very early rough ideas and turn them into real services, real businesses, things like that. We have a program, so it's part of their general education requirement at Illinois Tech that requires them to do that. But we also host all forms of student projects. So our motto is any student, any project. And we really try to help them develop the initial idea, make sure there's good product market fit, and then develop the prototypes that can make them successful.
Nice. I can only imagine the toys that you must have at your fingertips, man. That must be awesome.
Well, what's interesting is we do have some pretty cool prototyping 3D printers and CNC machines. And I think what's more important, though, is the process we have. So we have a lot of cool stuff, but still, if you're developing something new, we'd like you to start with paper, right? So you do some really rough paper prototypes if you're doing a digital service, or if you're going to do a physical thing, we want you to start with some foam core first, because just that act of building and iterating really helps students kind of further and refine their ideas. So we'll let them get to the cool tech later on, but we still work at a very basic level first.
You lay all your tools out. Still, the most valuable one is the whiteboard, if you ask me. It's the one where you can realize it's a dumb idea, and the one where you can share it with people the easiest, the fastest. Yeah, I'm right there with you.
Right. The great thing about a whiteboard is you can erase it.
That's exactly right. If you're using the right pen. So tell me about a dream around the idea shop for a second. Like, we have the garage at Microsoft. That's what we call ours, and all kinds of little gadgetry that is just insane. That individually I wouldn't be able to afford any of them, but here we walk in and it's just this massive thing. What do you think's on the horizon for you to buy next? Like, what do these sorts of shops like drool over?
Sure. For us right now, it's really focused on building up our electronics workbench. So students who are using some of the things that Martin's going to talk about a little bit later in terms of the software services and starting to pair them with sensors. Like we're seeing a lot of work there of students really beginning to think about and build and develop different sensors and things like Raspberry Pis. So that's really the focus of our investment right now, is trying to help students get better at building those little sensors. Oddly, at least half the projects are trying to build sensors to help improve home brewing of beer. I guess that's something common with...
What do you have, a bunch of college students or something?
We have a bunch of college students there. But I think that's one of the interesting things that we're fascinated with right now is, I guess... It very highly people call it the Internet of Things, right? But to us, there's so much opportunity of trying to connect sensors to software services, and oddly, that's what we're going to talk about a little bit later today. But that's where our focus is right now.
Very nice, very nice. My dream would be the holodeck. That'd be talk about a quick way to. We have the placard on the wall. I think they just have to get the rest of the room finished is all.
Right, exactly. That's on the technology roadmap, I guess. But yeah,
we've all got it at the end, right? That's right. With a replicator, because then that's like the ultimate 3D printer. Wow.
Exactly.
Totally.
Yeah.
Okay, back to the project though. Now let's start with Martin. How you know Jeremy because what was the connection?
Actually, back in the day, we did a number of hackathons at IIT, and Jeremy was like, hey, why don't you come by and chat with some students about kind of like what's happening in the digital space and how we could think about devices and sensors and do something with them, and that's how I kind of got wired in.
Nice.
So
now, Jeremy, introduce me just a little bit to this project. What was your vision? What are we solving?
Sure. I think, attendance is really, it's an unfortunate fact of life, right? You need to make sure from a security standpoint, from a safety standpoint, but from an academic standpoint, that the students are in the class. We found that over time, our faculty, they start out really well. First few classes are good with attendance, but over time it starts to drop off because it's part of it's just a task that not a lot of faculty members want to do. Sometimes they might forget, and we recognize that it was a big piece missing. So we do a lot of I guess lean thinking.
This isn't solving the problem of getting students into class. This is solving the problem of getting the faculty to tell us whether or not they're in class.
Well, that's where we started.
Okay,
I think the students knowing that attendance being taken and that there's a robust system behind it motivates them to get to class early as well. So, I mean, that's definitely part of it. But, as a faculty member, that's kind of where we started, of just making sure that we gave the faculty members a really easy and very robust and very reliable way to take class attendance as the students came in.
And then, Martin, what's hard about this?
Well, I mean, the interesting thing was, Jerry teaches a number of innovative courses, and one of the ones he teaches is on digital design. And it's funny because we were chatting the one day about like the problems in the class, and his fall class had, I don't know, almost 50 students, and he's fortunate enough to have a teaching assistant. So we're looking at the teaching assistant walking around, taking attendance, and it burns up, 30 minutes of the class. And this teaching assistant's in the master's program, so she has skills that she could actually add value to the class. And we're like,
right.
Jeremy looks at me, he's like, what's the problem with the digital design class actually using analog processes where you have to match a face? They're all in teams. There's no seating chart. So
right.
You have to literally match a face and then say, yep, that's the person, they're here. And you burn with the class of 50, you're burning a lot of time.
You are.
Yeah.
So Jeremy was like, there's got to be a better way to do this. And we started chatting through the fact that students have IDs, and it turns out that students have RFID cards built into their student ID. And wouldn't it be great if we could use an RFID reader and actually capture that information and provide an easy format for the teacher, for the TA, and even eventually for his students that they can check their own attendance,
And in come the sensors. I see. So
sensors,
I'm a
yes.
student at school. I show up. Of course, I've got my student ID so I can buy cheaper movie tickets. And then it
Right.
also happens to have a little RFID built in, and you have a sensor. All right. So what did we do? So we put it by the door, or how did it play out?
So essentially, the interesting about the Idea Shop is there isn't like a traditional classroom. It's an open space. And if you look at it, there's within that, different classes meet. So essentially, we have a TA for the class set up. Essentially, we treat it as a kiosk, if you will. But they set up a Surface Pro machine. They hook up the USB RFID card reader. And there's technology obviously underneath that we'll talk about. But essentially, that's the basic nuts and bolts of it. And it's that, so literally something that took, literally you got a roster of 50 students, you're looking for their picture, are they here, went to a card swipe in under 2 seconds.
Yeah, that's nice. And you can make it the student's responsibility instead of the TA's responsibility.
Right. The line, if you haven't swiped in, you're not here, does actually work pretty effectively.
It does, yes. Yeah.
Now, was this your vision, Jeremy? Is this what you were hoping it would be?
Absolutely. Yeah. Again, it was sort of a collaborative vision with Martin to help really think through what was possible. But I think, our classrooms at the Idea Shop, as you mentioned, present some unique challenges because it is an open space. And we actually teach the program in several different buildings around the university. So it wasn't just kind of setting a single device somewhere. So we had to have it be mobile. And the TAs, they come into the coordinator's office, they check out the Surface and the reader, they get to the class, and they get the students checked in. What's more important about this, at least to me, is that we've built a bigger service around it. So we've modeled the whole TA program to include this as well as some other duties, right? So it gives them a sense of responsibility and a sense of the requirements of them as an individual who's helping with the class. And it's really been great to see the TAs kind of take this on as a kind of a big responsibility to make sure that attendance is taken. And we've also seen just a massive increase in the students' sort of compliance with it. And the other great thing that is sort of behind all of this is we've never had before the ability to see attendance across the program. So remember, there's about 700 students, 700 to 800 students each semester in this program. And in terms of things like compliance and accreditation, it's really easy for us to show how good attendance is in all the classes. So we've got this nice large macro view that as an administrator is really helpful for me. Because a faculty tells me that attendance is good at his or her class, it might or might not be, I don't know, but this way we know positive.
Now you know, right, you can quantify exactly what they're talking about. And
Right.
you can talk to faculty or you can talk to students, whichever one makes the sense. Now,
Sure.
Martin, let's back out. No, let's dive in. Let's talk about the technology side of this. You said there's a Surface Pro going on, and
so kind of end to end, it's a client and server solution, right? So it starts with a Surface Pro. Initially, this one of the big tenets of Jeremy's course is this idea of kind of iteration. And part of what the students are doing is iterating their design. So literally in week 1 or week 2 of the course, this application was a command line interface where they swiped their card and initially had to type a few things in. And every week it got a little better. Then it became a WPF app. So from end to end, I guess you look at it, we have a Surface Pro, we have a Windows Presentation Foundation application on that.
okay,
It has a USB RFID card reader.
okay,
Yep. And then on the back end, we're using Azure Functions. So we wanted, essentially serverless compute. We didn't want to worry about, putting together a big infrastructure. So we use Azure Functions that do everything from loading a student list so they're initially populated to loading a class list so it's initially populated. And essentially what we do is when a student swipes their card, we hit the back end. We're using Azure Tables. We look up to see if we recognize that student's ID. If we do, then fantastic. If not, we prompt them for a little bit more information. And once we have it that first time, then we're fully integrated.
Okay, that makes sense to me. So, and is it offline capable?
No, it is not offline capable. So great question.
Version 1.1 right there.
Version 1.1, yes. So right now, so that's a great question. So, we've certainly iterated the product as we've moved through it. Initially, it was a WPF app that we installed. Given the fact that literally weekly or multi-times a week there were updates to it, that wasn't a great, exciting experience. Yeah. So I used an Azure website. I used the click once capability that's in WPF that we could actually publish as many updates as we want. And when the TA checked the app out and ran it, it automatically updated it so you always had the latest version.
Got it. Now let me ask you a question that's in my mind. First of all, I love WPF. WPF and I go back a long ways, and it's paid my mortgage for years. And it still is Microsoft's go-to technology for UI applications on the desktop. Absolutely, there's no question. But, I can't help but beg the question of why UWP didn't come into the story.
Yeah, that's a great question. So initially, the reason that, it's certainly in consideration. It was in the running. We looked at it from a WPF standpoint because we didn't want to have a store registration. We didn't want to have, so that the TA would have that level of responsibility.
Right, right.
So not that, essentially everything that we are doing in it, we could do as a Windows application itself instead of a WPF app. Mm-hmm. But we decided to at least initially use a WPF app just because the ease of deploying and not having to go through the whole store check-in process just made the iterations much faster.
Right. And today you're running it on a Surface Pro, but tomorrow maybe you're running it on some faculty's laptop that isn't running Windows 10, and you want to be able to give them options as well, right? There's a lot of things to really consider around it. And I think it's worth backing up to Click Once, which I still feel like is one of the best delivery mechanisms Microsoft ever dreamed up. I mean, it's just unbelievable. I think it's hilarious that Google Chrome is delivered by Click Once. I mean, it's just one of those kind of ironies, I suppose, that can happen. But it really is incredible. And Click Once is just a website, right? There's nothing to it. You just build it out, put it wherever it belongs. They open up a teeny tiny little, almost like a little shim that's running. It goes and checks to see if the website's has an update. If it doesn't, then it just launches your application. If it does, then it prompts you and you get an update that fast, that easy. You don't have to cycle through a store if you are doing really quick iterations through all the changes that you have going on. It's just right there as fast as you can do it, and you can even force it, right? You can say everybody needs to be using version 1.1, not 1.0, and you can put that on the website, and everybody else is kind of constricted by that constraint that you put on. I think that's pretty healthy. Now, functions. Now, why functions not and not just a web service?
That's a great question. We could have set up a web service, I suppose. Functions, instead of looking at like, I'm going to set up a web API or I'm going to set up an MVC infrastructure, I'm going to build out a bunch of controllers, which we could do and they would work great. But we wanted that quick iteration. And one of the things that Azure Functions does super well, it does a number of things super well, right? You don't have to build a server infrastructure is one thing.
Yeah.
They essentially are used on demand. So from a standpoint of how much it takes to run this system, essentially those functions are just sleeping, and when somebody makes a request, it actually services the request and returns a result. So it's not running all the time. It's essentially waiting for a request to come in. So it's cheaper to run that way. Yeah. The other thing that functions do incredibly well is they bind to inputs and events and outputs really well. So let me give you an example of that.
Okay.
So imagine that I want to write some code and I want it to very easily access an Azure table. Functions allow you to do that. I want it to be called, when somebody calls a web API, a REST endpoint, I want the Azure function to be called. It does that. It also
so as a trigger, you can use that to trigger and activate the function.
Yeah. So in fact, Jerry, that's a great way to talk about it. Think of it as it has triggers, it has inputs, it has outputs.
Yeah.
And the inputs and outputs are a range of things. They could be Azure tables, which we use. They could be Azure a service bus. It could be event queues. I mean, there's a list of blobs. Yeah.
Kind of everything in Azure, to be honest. Great.
Pretty much, yeah. In fact, actually, cognitive services face recognition stuff is actually wired in there too. So from our perspective, it was a super fast way to get this built, to start prototyping it. They do allow elastic scale, so you can literally say, okay, I don't want this on-demand approach where it's just pay per use. I want to actually run a beefier server, and I want to set up a specific service plan. If it got to that level of usage, you can grow to that as well. And it allowed us to, literally in week one with the command line interface, it was ugly, but we were talking to the back end, and this thing worked.
Yeah, nice. Well, you know what? And functions are very approachable technology too, because
Absolutely.
if you think about it, I could build a website. I could build a web service, and it's going to need 3 methods in order to make an application work. Well, what if I just took 3 methods, created 3 functions, forget about that web service, and I just have them up in order, and now I need to change method 2 so it does whatever. I never have to worry about interacting with, messing up, or whatever with method 1 and 3. I'm just playing around with method 2, making it better and better. And as you start thinking of version 1.2, 1.3, 1.4, whatever that is, you can go into the service, make those changes, and not worry about breaking like the fundamental behavior of the application at the same time.
Absolutely. One other really cool thing that I learned as I started to work with the Azure Functions is you can use shared code. So one of the big pieces here I said was like, hey, we need, there's some basic logging that's part of Azure Functions, but they don't actually log. It's like per invocation I get some logging. I wanted a view which was across all the uses. How do I get logging and see what this thing's doing, what's working, what's not working?
Yeah.
So we actually wrote initially table storage that it dumped logging into table storage. Then we changed it to use Azure Log Analytics.
Okay.
So we wrote a shared function that all the functions can use to actually do their logging, for example.
I see.
Yep. So it's not actually a function endpoint, but it's shared code that all the functions can actually use. And examples of that, like our logging service is a perfect example. All the functions actually need access to that as they log the various details of what they're doing. Made it shared code, and I can pull it in and use it in any of the functions that need it.
And you know what? In my experience with functions, one of the things that makes it very, very powerful, and it feels like a limitation at the beginning, is you go in to build a function, and you're like, okay, I need this DLL, and I need this reference, and you're like, whoa, there are certain things I can't do. I can't make a service reference to a WCF call or something like that. And I feel like there's a limitation, but it's not. All I have to do is build a class library. I can take my class library with the full .NET stack, everything I want to have capabilities inside that. I can test it, run against it, whatever. Then take that DLL, hand it to the function. The function then has very little logic in it. It's just calling into that well-tested, well-written, fully supported DLL I created for that bit of logic. You know what I mean?
Yeah. In fact, let me go a step further, Jerry. You can use NuGet.
Gosh.
You can use NuGet packages, right? So part of the thing I want to do is like, oh, I need a NuGet package. I actually want to talk to DocDB because we wanted to do some logging into DocDB as well. I was like, how do we do that? Oh, I can include the NuGet package. How do I do that? I just go to project.json. I put there's a little bit of formatting, but I dropped it in there, and when it builds, it actually pulls in that NuGet package, and we can use it. So that worked fantastically well too. The other cool thing, and you're probably aware of this, but the other cool thing is in Visual Studio, I can actually connect to the functions and debug them, right? So it's not just like, oh, I typed something in there and it didn't work. What happened? I literally can connect from Visual Studio, do debugging on that function, which is just super powerful. It's great.
Yeah, it's super powerful. And you don't have to go read the logs to figure out what that esoteric problem was. You can just fix it on the fly. I mean, honestly, you can fix it on the fly. And so it's pretty cool. Now, Jeremy, what was your expectation going into this? How long does a project like this take in your mind when you're planning?
Well, it happened a lot faster than I thought it would, and I think a big part of it was just the iterative development that we were able to work through. And what's wonderful about it is, because it started with the digital service design class, and students naturally ask, well, what is a digital service? What are we supposed to design? And what's great about this product that Martin's created is we can actually say this is what you're trying to do, right? This is a digital service. It takes the physical input, the RFID reader, your card. It creates this great service. Here are the benefits for it, and here's how we developed it, right? It was this sort of develop a quick iteration, debug it from a technical side, but also from a user side too, right? We had to figure out the right process to actually ensure that there was compliance across all the classes as we move through. So it's just a great way to help the students. It's like a coffee table book about coffee tables, right? It's a great way for the students to kind of understand what a digital service is, but also role model for them in a very positive way the type of interaction that we want between design and technology. and the type of process and approach we want our students to go after, which is this quick iteration, get user feedback, quick iteration, get user feedback. So I guess in a way it kind of happened at the pace that we expected, just because there was really close collaboration between the teaching team and Martin, and that was the critical piece.
Yeah, that sort of collaboration sometimes can slow things down and sometimes can speed things up, just depending on how it's managed. So I'm going to guess that version 1.1 for you might actually be UI related and getting maybe students involved in the design of interaction and things like that.
Sure, absolutely, right. Just thinking through, within the class, that what we really want them to do is get that core insight first. What problem are you trying to solve in the world? So you're not just creating a technology for technology's sake, but you're actually developing something that's going to make people's lives better. And that sounds very lofty and high level, but ultimately, I mean, that's what we did with this particular product here. It's made the lives of our TAs a lot better. It's certainly helped our faculty and administration, but it's also great for the students, right? So there's a clear value for all the stakeholders involved. And in the digital service design class, that's often the first thing that we want people to search for is that problem that they can solve.
Is that problem that they can solve? Yeah, makes sense to me. Martin, how do you work with people who aren't sitting around you all the time? What was the collaboration experience?
So that's a great question. Jeremy and I talked about what he wanted the experience to be. One of the things that I think Jeremy is being pretty modest here. Of the 35 or 40 courses that are that meet in the Idea Shop and around IIT, they all teach user-centric design. Like, that is the premise for it. And the thing that's neat about it is the student teams themselves is a mix of, there might be an architect, a computer scientist, and a business major all in a team. So you have this broad vocabulary. Basically, we use the class as a weekly kind of feedback mechanism, right? We saw what worked. We got feedback on, well, this did work. This didn't seem to work. This took longer than we thought. And we tried to reflect that into the next iteration. So we used literally these rapid prototypes as instead of it being, a lot of conversation and a lot of whiteboard, we tried to bite off a small piece of functionality that we could attack and put that right into the prototype as simply as possible and get feedback on it.
Right. Jeremy, if I could send you back in time to when this project was just about to begin, what's a piece of advice you would give to yourself for this project?
Well, I think for me the piece of advice I would give is calm down. Not that I was ever too amped up, but for someone like me who doesn't have any development background at all, when I would initially sort of see some of the issues that would come up, I didn't actually know how to solve them myself. But the technology that Martin was using was so flexible and so easy to fix that, after about one or two iterations, even if not everything went right that day, I'm like, oh, it's going to be fixed anyway. So that would be my advice: is it's going to work. You'll be fine.
Yeah. This isn't the end, right? At the end.
This isn't the end.
So.
Yes.
Yeah. Martin, and I don't want to sound like a salesman here, but don't you feel like a lot of customers we engage with are often, the story is often a kind of a surprise at how rapidly you can build out a solution with our tool sets that, it really is a matter of linking things together. You don't have to go and design an entire table storage system. You don't have to go out and figure out how to queue up data so that you can scale and how to slide the slider. These things are just there. We've already got WPF, and he can give this to his students and say, design the crap out of this UI, and you can build it. These things are just sitting there waiting for almost our imagination to catch up with them. Don't you feel like it's still, even all these years later, customers are still surprised by what can be done so quickly?
Yeah. I think in some ways it's how you break the project up, right? If you have this view that it's, kind of a waterfall, you're going to build this whole thing and you have to have the entire design, it can be painful and it can take a while. Credit to Jeremy and his team. We looked at it from a standpoint of what would add value? Like, what's an MVP of this thing that we could actually start to get feedback on? Yeah. And we were able to do that. To your point, it's interesting. I got to see Bill Gates speak once in a kind of small setting of like 400 people. That's a small setting for him, I guess. But what he talked about was the magic of software And to your point, like when you have a platform and there's things that you can pull in that help you get stuff done, it is kind of magical, right? And to your point, Azure Functions for me, yes, we could have set up controllers and models and done all that. Absolutely, we could have done that, right?
Sure.
But using Azure Functions, we essentially said we can just treat this as endpoints. We have 8 or 9 explicit things that we need to have happen here to make this an operational system, and we were able to attack that. And literally in a week, we had enough of the back end running that we could attach a character interface to the front of it and actually have our first experience to prove, this could work, right? And from there, we iterated and improved it, and we went to clearly a GUI interface. But it does. I think the magic of software, that I love that line, because it does feel magical at times when you're like, in a week's time, you're like, this is so much better than it was last week, and this is so much better than the week it was before that. It's super exciting too.
You were kind of lucky to have a guy like Jeremy who already understands the methodology, right? And you don't have to spend time teaching the methodology, the value of iterations. Go ahead, Jeremy. I didn't mean to cut you off.
Oh, no, I just think, just pointing out that magic thing, it's sometimes when you're involved in the process like I was, you sort of lose track of how magical it is. But, just talking to our coordinator about the massive difference in compliance and the amount of attendance we're getting, and just watching the excitement and the engagement of our teaching assistants, I mean, that's really, that is magic, right? That it was able to happen that quickly. And sometimes I forget how amazing and how quickly it all came together. But it really has created a pretty big shift in behavior at the school.
Yeah. I try to remind him of that all the time.
And I think it is easy to get too close to it, right? Because I was talking to an evangelist the other day. Oh, it was Gavin. And he's like, this in C# they have this magical, unbelievable thing called Link, right? And I'm like, why are you talking about Link, man? We've had that forever, and it's awesome. And I realized at that moment, that I just take that for granted. That I thought everybody knew what Link was and how powerful and productive it was, and all these other things. I was working with another evangelist a couple of weeks ago, and we were saving data we were reading data from a database, and we added an entity framework, EDMX, and honestly, it's right-click, add EDMX, point to the database, and you say context.get, and it's over. One line, and there's your data. What do you want to do with it? And it's just one of these things where I'm like, isn't that how everybody gets data? No, it is. Most people do things the hard way because they don't know the easy way. And once you show them the easy way, all of a sudden it's like standing on the shoulders of giants, and they have all these brilliant ideas. They're like, now that I don't have to waste all my time like a TA who's really well qualified, now I don't have to waste my time taking attendance.
Writing everything down.
Yeah, exactly. Now I can be asked to do real work. Jeremy, what is version 2? What do you hope it becomes?
Well, I think the next step is definitely starting to think about other ways to other interfaces. So definitely face recognition is one that we're really interested in, and we spend some time, and I know that's a part of the platform. The big thing for us was the ethics behind it, or even just the optics. And we've done some research, and the students are actually mostly okay with it, right?
The ethics and the optics together, both of them were in your mind? That's funny.
Both of them were in our mind. So we just wanted to make sure the students didn't mind, having a camera there, taking their picture as part of attendance, and sure. The student surveys and very rough focus groups we've conducted, everybody's for it. In fact, they. I'm not trying to say anything about millennials, but they're looking forward to saving that one swipe. Yeah,
they want it. They'll have an Alexa in every room, man. What is that? A full-time microphone everywhere I go? That's awesome. Exactly. I'm like, okay. What could possibly go wrong? Nothing. Keep going, Jeremy. Sorry, cynicism.
No, I don't even want to think about that. But the other thing that's really interesting is starting to think about this. More university-wide. So we, beyond just our part of the required curriculum, start bringing it to some of the other parts of the required curriculum at Illinois Tech, which will just allow us when it comes to, and I don't want to sound too much like a bureaucrat and administrator, but it's a big deal assessment, right? And this is just one part of a larger assessment portfolio that we just frankly haven't had access to before, and it's really going to be a shift change in terms of the type of data we're going to be able to to be able to collect and show how effective our education is.
I suppose, maybe version 3, there might even be an attendance kiosk in the back of significant rooms, where
Sure.
you don't really need to go check out a surface. It's just sitting there waiting
Right.
for this very repetitive task. Even going and checking it out is the repetitive task.
Yeah. Yeah, we're already starting for the next version of how we're going to array the cameras around so that we don't need to have a surface everywhere, as much as that might be good for you guys. But just using the cameras everywhere, how we can do that is certainly something we're thinking about.
How would you do that, Martin? I would take your picture as you come into the room, and I'd look you up with cognitive services to do facial detection. And if I find you, I'd check you marked as attending. Is that the idea?
Yeah, that's the intent. Yep. So that's kind of we're starting to do some early work on that now. We're hoping to actually have in our spare time, we're hoping to have a version of it that actually works kind of with the existing application. So we have kind of, a true and running system as we start to learn more about student, the taking ID essentially, or taking attendance via pictures. So we've got some baseline pictures, and we're building out the first version of this to actually kind of like we did before, just iteratively test it and see what kind of results we get.
I love it how simple ideas end up being these massive technology projects where you can be like, Anna, we can try this and this and this. And instead of trying to solve this gigantic problem, we have this little problem, and we have all these ideas that we can toss around and play with because it's not overly complicated, the whole scenario is. It's pretty cool. Well, it sounds like the idea shop's in the 21st century, Martin. Good job, Jeremy. I'm pretty excited. Next time I'm in Chicago, I'll make sure and drop by and laser cut some stuff with you or something.
Totally.
You're
they do
more
have laser
than
cutters.
welcome.
Yeah.
We'd love to have you. You're always welcome.
Nice. Maybe I'll just cut out a little Star Trek emblem or something like that.
There you go. That'd be perfect for you.
It'd be perfect.
You shouldn't be surprised that in a school of mostly tech students, we cut out a lot of Star Wars and Star Trek memorabilia on those machines. So there's probably a file somewhere. You wouldn't even have to create it.
Yeah, perfect. I am not surprised. Wherever smart people are, wherever the bright and the brilliant are, of course there are Star Trek fans, of course.
Absolutely.
And they are thick through Microsoft too. There's no getting around it. It's pretty sweet. Jeremy, pretty cool project. Thanks for talking to me about it, and thanks for being on the show today.
Oh, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. It's great to meet you.
Yeah. Thanks, Martin. You knocked it out of the park, buddy. Thanks for being on the show.
Thank you, Jerry. Jerry and Jeremy. It's too much for my mind. I'm thinking Azure Functions, and I'm trying to get your names right. It's too hard.
Right. Well, you knocked it out of the park right up until the end. All right, guys. Thanks again. Have a great day.
Thanks.
All right.
Have a great day.
Bye-bye.